All right, let's talk about playing SUDS. In the Scalable Universal Dice System role-playing game, how do you accomplish things? Like if we're not rolling a d20 to find out if we succeeded at something, how do I make a roll? What do I do? So you're going to have in all of your character sheets, you're going to have statistics. You're going to have a stat. And it's always going to be, rather than a number, it's going to be the letter D with a number, which is the size of your die. A D6, a D4, might have a D3 or even a D2 because we're going to scale dice up and down, all the way from a D2, which you can flip a coin or you can go odds, evens, or however you guys want to differentiate that in your own players group. With a D3, you might have a D3, which they do make, same with a D2, or you might roll a D6 and divide by 2, take it half. But you're going to move up and down along the spectrum. And in order to have your size dice that you need to roll with a stat, and you always roll a stat die, which is going to be your strength, your dexterity, your personality score, and also your intelligence score, as well as some characters will have an arcane ability score, but not everybody. And that's going to depend on what kind of character you decide you're going to be. Like spellcasters are going to have that arcane, and some of them who are dedicated as spellcasters will have a better rating when they start versus people who just have a little bit to this arcane. They're kind of dabblers in the occult, or they're dabblers in mystic arts and religions, and they're going to have a die rating. It's a little lower, and they're going to have a little less knowledge. They're not as skilled, but they're still capable of doing some of those things. So in order to do one of those things, you take a stat die. Usually you also get a skill die, and then possibly you'll have other things that are going to come into play. So you might be rolling one die, you might be rolling 5 or 6 dice, and you do this by building a die pool or a dice pool. So you might have your D6 from your strength, and then you might have a skill available in that's a D4. There may be a specialty in exactly what you're doing within the skill, and that's another D4. And then maybe you've got another, like a personality signature, because this applies to something in your backstory that's very, very personal to you. Maybe that's a D6. So you're going to take all of those dice together, and then you're going to roll them and add up the number. And there's going to be a difficulty, like a rating, a number. It's called a DF. When you're just trying to hit the difficulty factor number, you might say this is given that hypothetical scenario, you're trying to do something, let's say it's related to trains at a train yard, and it's a DF 9, and you rolled those 4 dice, and it comes up as a 9. You succeed. If it comes up as an 8, you failed. And then there are ways to have what's called a critical success, or a crit, and a catastrophic failure, or a CAT. You have to roll at least 3 dice in order to crit, succeed, or fail. But once you have done that, then you succeed and the story moves on. Something about SUDS is that it's very driven by the narrative. It's very much driven by the story. So there's a whole lot less hack and slash and combat minutia than there are in maybe some other games. And maybe a closer analog is going to be like Werewolf the Apocalypse and the World of Darkness games, where combat typically only lasts about 3 rounds. That's done intentionally so that it speeds the game up. And we get into the storyline and the mechanic that the storyteller, or the GM or DM in D&D, the person controlling all this stuff, this is done so that we can move the story forward, and we can really build the storyline, the plot, and develop the characters and within the context of the people around the pool, tying them all together, and then to the story, and hopefully then to the other parts of the story, the big bad evil guy at the end that you have to fight, and heighten all of the tension and build up relationships with the NPCs. So you build dice pools, and that's how you're going to succeed or fail in your DF, your standard difficulty check. There's another kind of difficulty check called an OP, which is, let's say you are directly, so you're arm wrestling somebody. That's pitting force against force. And so what you're going to do is the initiator is going to roll the number, and then the other person will have to roll higher in order to succeed. And so you can have some of this back and forth, and there's a part of our combat system in here, it's called social combat, which is like that, where instead of doing combat with fists, you're doing combat verbally, you're kind of spinning barbs back and forth, politically maneuvering, that sort of thing. But not just like straight up bullying or trading insults, like there's a point to it. Like you're trying to make a person get frustrated and leave, like you have an objective to it. And once that happens, once they take kind of a temporary damage equal to like their intellect score, then they get frustrated and they storm out. And maybe that person's you if you lose the opposed check roll, the OP. So that's two of the types of checks. I mentioned difficulty. I mentioned scaling. So I should mention that there is a top level to the die scale. So you might go all the way down to below a D2 when you're scaling down to a 0, and now you're stuck. Like you don't roll anything. Even if you have a modifier, you don't just take the modifier plus the 0. 0 is 0. There's no roll. But you might get from a D8 up to a D10, and then you might get up to a D12. And then if you have a bonus that scales up past a D12, you start over again at D4. So you might turn a D12 with a +1 die scale. So that's written in the rules as a plus or a minus DS. So it might be D12 +1 DS. Well, you can't go past 12, and you add a D4 because that's where you start. If now all of a sudden something scales you down past that, you don't lose the D4. The D4 goes down to a D3. Certain monsters, giant things, might have a much larger die scale. And this is covered more in details in the rules, but they might be a D20 or a D100. This system is fairly low HP. It's fairly deadly. Maybe don't fist fight the kaiju. It's not going to go very well for you. And his lowest ability, his version of a D4 is going to be a D20. You're probably just not going to be able to contend with that. So use it smart. Now there are some other things that will impact your dice scaling mechanics. For example, your size. Once you get beyond, once you encounter or you say you're scoring damage, for example, against somebody of a dramatically different size, you're going to get a modifier to your damage, to the efficacy of what you did, or even to your targeting. Because when you're a small guy trying to hit a big guy, he's a much larger target than you're used to trying to have to aim at. And the big guys with the small guys, it's going to be the same thing, where it's going to be harder for them to hit. So there's a sliding scale that talks about the size mechanic as well. And then actions and movement. You should know that when you're moving, like this system isn't written to be necessarily played on a grid mechanic. You could certainly do that with like a homebrew. You could do a 5-foot grid, or you could use miniatures. But this system's a little more free-form than that. It's meant to be played where close enough is good enough. If you're like, well, we're in the same room, and I want to attack the guy, and it's like he's 32 feet away, and your movement is only 30 feet. The GM should be a good sport and spot you the 2 feet. Like we don't want the narrative to break down in such strict minutia where you're worried about like real strict attack of opportunity rules and mechanics and engagement mechanics and exactly how far am I away and where, like, well, my arms are this, I've got 30 feet, but my arms got to be at least a few, and the knife's probably 2 inches. When you have to start breaking it down into such specific nuance, the story hangs, and for every other player sitting around the table, they're just rolling their eyes going, come on, John, why are we complaining about this? We're all waiting to make our turns. And that what that means is that it makes it less fun for other players. It stretches out the things that are boring for everybody except for the specific person being engaged at that moment. So this system is meant to speed a lot of those mechanics up. Like I said, make good enough. So you have a couple kinds of actions you can take. You can take major actions and minor actions. And there's some nuance to that. There's also free actions and special actions. And the main difference between major and minor actions is that a major action is like, this is my main thing. This is the only thing I'm concentrating on. But then you can also do minor actions if you choose. But let's say it's your turn. You're like, I want to punch that guy and then that guy, and then I want to kick that guy in the head, all Chuck Norris style. you can do all those. You have to declare them at the beginning of your turn. And then for every action you want to do, you lose 1 step on your die. So you're Chuck Norris. You've got a D12. You want to fight this guy. And you've got, we're doing 3 actions. I have a D12. Well, for the first action, we'll have to step it down to be a D10. The next action, our stat die that we're rolling is going to be a D8. And then a D6 when we try and kick that guy over there. And so that's how you can do multiple attacks. Or multiple actions, I guess. Very often that will translate as attacks, or that'd be special attacks included in there. Like, I just want to act defensively, like for this round, or I want to try to protect this person with a specific shielding action. And there's a whole list of those inside the book, the different things that you can do. And then free actions are always free. That's going to include things like talking, kind of bantering back and forth, sharing different things. And your GM might be like, it makes sense if you want to do this for free. So there's a lot of bartering with your game master, where you're like, I think I should be able to, to throw this over to the guy because I know he's going, my partner over here, he's going to try and go run over and pick that lock so we can all escape. Can I throw that to him and then attack the guy? And like, throwing it to him is probably in a case like that should probably just be a free action. It's probably not going to make such a dramatic, game-changing scenario that it needs to be anything like super special for the guy who's doing a little key toss. Now, maybe for the guy who's supposed to catch the key and then go unlock it, catching the key is going to be really important to him for his part of the plan. You might make him roll to catch it. You might make that a free action, and then if he fails, then he suspend his action to pick the keys up or something. But there's ways to move the plot forward narratively, like I said, without bogging down in the minutia and making everything be a roll. Rolling dice is fun. But when all you're doing is rolling dice, you're not playing a role-playing game anymore. Now you're just rolling dice. So there are some fun things about the system when you have a cat fail. When you have a crit, I'm going to start with this because everybody knows critical success. You roll a 20. I can do whatever I want. I'm God in this moment because for some reason, 1 in 20 is not like that's not, what was that, 5%? Like 5% of the time you don't get to just always succeed. Like you can't just knock out a linebacker with the little flip of your hand because you rolled a 20. That's just not how reality works. And we're striving for a good balance with reality, avoiding power creep, and creating scenarios that are very often fantastic, but have some sense of being grounded in what's actually going to be possible, like obeying the mechanics, like without that wild swing in your power balance or unbalance. So in ours, if you roll a critical success, you roll a crit, which is going to be the highest die face on at least half of your dice when you're rolling 3. So if you're rolling 4 dice and you roll, and let's say all 4 dice are D6s, and 2 of them come up 6s, you got a critical success. What that means is that action turns into a free action, so you get to add a whole extra thing that you can do, but the numbers still have to add up to a success. So if you rolled 2 6s and a 2 and a 1, you rolled a 9. I'm sorry, not a 9. That's a 12. 2 6s would be 12. 13, 14, 15. And let's say the DC, the DF, in this case, was going to be 16, and you roll a 15. Yeah, you crit success, but you also didn't succeed. So that becomes essentially a free failure, and you can try that all over again, but you still have to hit the difficulty factor number you were aiming for. So with a crit fail, it's going to be the opposite. If you rolled a 6, a 5, and then 2 1s, no matter what, you failed. Even if with a 6, 5, and 2 1s, that's going to be 13. Let's say it was a DF 11, you actually failed because you crit failed. So a crit fail always fails. A crit success does not always succeed. But even though you failed that, there's a bit of a bonus to it. So you actually gain some free luck, which you can use later on. We'll talk about luck in a little bit. But you have to tell a really short story, like everything pauses, and you have to tell us. I want to make sure I get this right. So So I'm looking at my notes here. So you're gonna have to tell a story about something in your backstory. It's a flashback is what we call this. So you have to include when, what, how, and why if you want to get that free point of luck to add to your luck pool. So the let me see and sometimes the why might be unknown, like you don't know why this happened, like something just happened to me, and I was the recipient of some other activity or action, like I was abducted by aliens, and like the why I don't know why I'm the abductee, like I wasn't doing the abducting, but the how is a reference to if this was something you did or if it's something that happened to you. It's handy then to take and like write these things down and put it on your character sheet. This will add then to your backstory, and that creates more nuance. It builds all your characters together, and it makes it so that your characters can be more fun, more engaged in the story. Might yield a little bit of plot armor as well for you if your DM really likes where your character starts to develop into. But let me give you an example of this. I'm just reading straight out of the book here. Dave rolls 3 dice for his character. He rolls a 12, a 4, and a 6 while he's trying to pick a luck. A D12, D4, and a D6. He rolls a 12, a 1, and a 1, so a 14. He needed a 10, so it should have succeeded, except it doesn't because it was a crit fail. So Dave has a flashback where he tells a story where Dave goes, I nearly froze to death as a child. I was locked out of my house. I remember my fingers being so cold that I could not work all of the things, and so I vowed to never again be locked out of anywhere. And so that's why he learned lockpicking. And that's what's a part of his backstory and who he is. And so it becomes a critical part of his character that people are going to remember. And it explains maybe why he failed in this moment. He just froze up thinking about that memory. Something give him a piece of luck. And he can spend that next time he wants to make a roll. And you can use luck for a variety of things. And we're going to talk about that in the next video.